The ink beneath Evelyn March's signature was still wet when Gabriel Voss asked what hour she preferred to die. She looked up from the agreement she had just signed. The document released the fraudulent lien against her house, erased $480,000 of Daniel's gambling debt, and hired her to audit a criminal ledger for one night. Gabriel had placed all three promises into 6 pages of precise language. Evelyn had read every line before signing. At 52, after a career spent finding lies hidden inside respectable numbers, she did not put her name beneath anything she had not understood. "I asked what time," Gabriel repeated. He opened the black ledger lying beside her contract and turned it until she could read the page. Her name appeared halfway down a column labeled Original Holder. Beside it were her birth date, social security number, former employer, blood type, and a notation describing the house where she had lived for 23 years. The final column contained one word and one date. Closure, Sunday, 6 p.m. For several seconds, Evelyn heard only the small mechanical click of the ceiling fan above them. Daniel's sealed envelope remained inside her handbag, carrying Gabriel's name in her husband's handwriting, and the sentence that had brought her to this shuttered room in the French Quarter. "He knows what they did to me." Gabriel uncapped a black fountain pen. He drew a line through Sunday, wrote "Tonight, 11:30 p.m., and placed his initials beside the change. Evelyn's chair moved backward against the floor. "You waited until I signed." "I waited until you accepted the deal. You hired me to audit the record of my murder." "I hired you to find the man who scheduled it." "Then why did you move the date forward?" Gabriel closed the pen and returned it to the inner pocket of his charcoal coat. At 56, he had the contained heaviness of a man who wasted neither motion nor warning. Silver marked his temples, but nothing softened the hard intelligence in his face. He controlled an underground market in false identities, and he had just altered the date of Evelyn's death as casually as an accountant correcting an invoice. "Because Sunday gives Owen Pike time to kill you," he said. "Tonight gives me time to make him believe he already has." The name meant nothing to her, but the phrasing did. Gabriel had not said save. He had said make him believe. Men like Daniel had always trusted language to hide the part of a bargain that harmed someone else. Evelyn lifted the signed agreement and tore it neatly in half. Gabriel watched without reacting. "The lien has already been released. Then consider the audit canceled. If you leave, Pike's observer across the street will report that you found your name and ran. You will not reach your house." Evelyn stood. She was 5'6", soft through the waist and hips, with the full figure Daniel had once praised in public and criticized only after he began resenting every form of comfort he could not control. Grief had made her quieter, not smaller. She placed both pieces of the agreement on the ledger and leaned toward Gabriel until he had to look directly at the woman whose death he had amended. "You knew I was being watched before I entered." "Yes." "You let me sign while a killer sat outside." "Yes." "And your protection begins with frightening me into obedience." Gabriel's gaze remained steady. "My protection begins with giving the killer a story he will believe." Evelyn picked up the ledger. 2 men appeared beyond the half-open door, but Gabriel raised one hand and stopped them before they entered. He did not attempt to take the book from her. That restraint was deliberate too. Everything about him seemed chosen to create the appearance of choice, while he controlled the price of every alternative. She carried the ledger to the window and moved one shutter by less than an inch. A gray utility van waited across the street. Its engine was running. A man in a municipal rain jacket sat behind the wheel despite the clear evening, holding a phone low against the steering wheel. "What did Daniel owe you?" Evelyn asked. "The note belonged to a casino lender that operated through one of my companies." "The lien used my forged signature." "Yes. You knew it was forged." "I discovered that after Daniel's death." "Yet you allowed collectors to bring it to my house this morning." "I allowed them to deliver documents. They were instructed not to touch you." Evelyn turned from the shutter. "You manufactured the emergency. I accelerated one that already existed. Pike ordered the lien activated because financial pressure would force you to search Daniel's papers. He expected that search to lead you here. The envelope in her bag suddenly felt less like a message from the dead and more like a leash placed in her hand. Daniel had hidden Gabriel's card in a safe deposit box 11 months before his death. Evelyn had found it only because the collectors showed her a loan number that matched the box record. She had believed her husband had left her a path toward truth. Now Gabriel was telling her someone had designed the path in advance. She opened the ledger again. Hundreds of identities filled its pages. Some entries listed acquisition prices. Others showed payments for birth certificates, tax histories, driving records, medical summaries, and sealed federal files. A smaller number carried closure dates. Evelyn did not need Gabriel to explain what closure meant. The amounts following those entries were too high to represent paperwork and too regular to represent coincidence. Who is Owen Pike? A deputy United States Marshal assigned to witness relocation. And he sells the identities of protected witnesses? He sells their files before they are moved. My market purchases some of them. Other organizations purchase the rest. Evelyn looked at him. Your market? Yes. You are not investigating Pike because he kills people. You are investigating him because he is selling the same identities to more than one buyer. Gabriel did not evade the accusation. Duplicated names attract federal attention. Federal attention destroys inventory. The absence of shame was almost refreshing. Daniel had wrapped every selfish decision in the language of family. Gabriel simply stated the value he had protected. Evelyn returned to the table and examined her entry. A small square had been drawn beside Daniel's initials. 3 payments followed, each routed through companies she recognized from his commercial lighting business. The dates began 14 months earlier, 3 months before his car was found near the river with alcohol in his blood and no bottle inside the vehicle. You knew Daniel was connected to this ledger? Yes. You knew before he died? Yes. And you let the police call his death an accident? Gabriel's silence answered before his voice did. The evidence that contradicted the accident was inside records that would have exposed my operation. Evelyn closed the book with both hands. She had imagined Daniel's killer as someone who entered his life briefly, committed one brutal act, and disappeared. Gabriel's admission revealed something worse. A circle of men who had understood enough to intervene and had each decided that Daniel's life cost more than the truth was worth. She should have left. She should have taken the ledger into the street and forced the watcher to react where witnesses could see him. Instead, the old forensic instinct that grief had numbed for 11 months began separating facts from outrage. Pike wanted her to find Gabriel. Gabriel wanted Pike to see her find him. Daniel had arranged the connection before either man expected Evelyn to examine it. Someone had miscalculated her. I will continue the audit, she said, under new terms. Gabriel waited. The released lien stays released, whether I live or die. Every page I examine is copied to an attorney I choose. No drug enters my body. No official record is altered without federal authorization. My sister receives proof that I am alive before Monday. When we have evidence against Pike, I decide whether the ledger is released. The final condition threatens people whose identities were bought for protection rather than crime. I know how to redact victims. It also threatens my business. That is not a victim. For the first time, Gabriel's expression showed something beyond calculation. It was not anger. It was the recognition of a boundary he could not move without proving her judgment correct. He crossed to the door and spoke to someone in the corridor. A minute later, a tall black woman in a navy suit entered carrying a government identification case. She introduced herself as Special Agent Lydia Grant from the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General. Her badge and credentials survived Evelyn's careful inspection, as did the secure number Evelyn called from a landline. Grant had been investigating Pike for 7 months. 3 protected witnesses had vanished after relocations that Pike supervised. 2 later appeared under altered names in criminal financial records. A third had been found dead before he could testify. Grant suspected Pike was stealing identities and selling the original holders' locations, but every internal search triggered alerts that allowed him to clean the files. Gabriel contacted me 6 weeks ago, Grant said. He gave me enough transaction data to prove a leak existed, but not enough to identify his buyers or his document network. He wanted immunity for himself. He did not receive it. Gabriel stood near the window. That remains under discussion. No, Grant said. It remains refused. Evelyn looked from one to the other. You are cooperating, but neither of you trusts the other. That is accurate, Grant replied. And the death entry beside my name? Grant opened a slim case file. Pike had created a dormant federal identity assessment for Evelyn using her tax records, fingerprints from an old contractor clearance, medical details, and family contacts. The file had no legitimate case number. It existed only as a package that could be sold. Pike's access logs showed he had reopened it that morning, shortly after the debt collectors visited Evelyn's house. Grant placed a photograph on the table. The man in the utility van was Mason Rill, a former sheriff's deputy who had worked security for 2 companies linked to Pike. Traffic cameras placed Rill near Daniel's car on the night Daniel died. We cannot arrest Pike for looking at an unauthorized file, Grant said. We need the financial chain, the identity transfers, and evidence connecting his contractors to the planned closures. More importantly, we need to identify the witnesses currently exposed before Pike moves or kills them. Evelyn touched the changed date in the ledger. Why tonight? Grant did not answer immediately. Gabriel did. Because Pike scheduled you for Sunday. If he learns tonight that you are dead, he will check the internal file, contact the buyer of your identity, and begin cleaning the transaction. Agent Grant has authorization to place a controlled death status marker inside the compromised database. No death certificate will be filed. No public agency will declare you dead. Only the channel Pike illegally monitors will report it. And the funeral? A private memorial, Grant said. Closed casket, no official burial. We believe Pike hid a physical retrieval code inside the transaction involving your identity. Gabriel will make him believe the ledger page containing that code is sealed in the coffin. Pike will have to choose between allowing the evidence to be buried or exposing the authority he uses to seize it. Evelyn looked at Gabriel. You planned my funeral before I entered this room. I planned several outcomes. You also knew I would demand federal oversight. No, I hoped you would accept mine. That was your first mistake tonight. Grant's presence corrected some of the danger, but none of the coercion. Evelyn had signed before seeing her own name, and Gabriel had changed the date before explaining the operation. He had wanted genuine terror, because Pike's observer would recognize rehearsed behavior. The strategy was effective precisely because it treated Evelyn's fear as a tool. She looked through the shutter again. Rill remained in the van. What happens if I refuse? Grant answered rather than Gabriel. I can move you into emergency protection, but Pike knows the system better than most people assigned to guard it. Until we identify the compromised personnel, I cannot promise that relocation will remain secret. Gabriel said, The funeral gives him a reason to stop hunting you. For how long? Long enough to find the people he intends to erase next. Evelyn returned to the ledger. The date beside her name seemed less like a prophecy now and more like a weapon being held by 3 different people. Pike had scheduled her real death. Gabriel had scheduled a false one. Grant had converted it into an investigation. None of them had asked what becoming dead would cost the woman required to perform it. I will do it, she said. But the moment anyone changes the terms without my consent, the ledger goes public. Grant accepted. Gabriel did not speak. Evelyn looked directly at him. That includes you. I heard you. No, you calculated the consequences. Hearing comes later. The audit began at 7:45. Grant brought an encrypted government laptop that could compare the ledger's case abbreviations against access records without exposing protected names. Gabriel's attorney, Celeste Arnaud, arrived with a portable scanner and a written preservation protocol. She was 60, elegant, and openly irritated that Gabriel had allowed a private operation to become a federal crime scene. Evelyn established 3 working sets. The first contained protected identities. The second contained civilian identities assembled through spouses, employers, doctors, and creditors. The third contained closure payments. She ignored the names at first and followed timing. Numbers were easier to trust than people because numbers did not become innocent merely because someone loved them. A pattern emerged within an hour. Every identity sold by Pike passed through one of 4 cemetery service companies before reaching a buyer. The companies did not bury anyone. They purchased transport permits, obituary data, and death notification access. Their invoices created plausible administrative noise around people who were about to vanish. The closure payments followed a different route. They moved through legal settlement trusts managed by a firm in Mississippi. Owen Pike's adult son worked there as a compliance officer. That connection alone proved nothing, but the transfer intervals matched Pike's database access to the minute. Evelyn marked 6 transactions and pushed them toward Grant. He does not receive the money when he sells an identity. He receives it when the original holder is confirmed dead or missing. The trust releases funds only after someone logs a closure code. Grant examined the sequence. Can you identify who enters it? Not from the ledger, but I can identify whose money waits for it. Gabriel watched from across the room. He had spent years treating the ledger as a record of ownership. Evelyn treated it as a record of dependency. Pike needed buyers, transport contractors, and payment trustees. Gabriel needed Pike's files. Each man had believed the other was replaceable while constructing a system in which neither could move without leaving evidence inside the other's books. At 9:15, Grant received an alert. Pike had accessed Evelyn's decoy status less than 4 minutes after the controlled death marker appeared. He then opened 2 protected witness files unrelated to hers and downloaded their relocation summaries to an unauthorized device. He is cleaning the channel, Grant said. We need the names behind those case numbers. Evelyn found them through payment correlations rather than direct entries. One was a retired union official named Thomas Talbot, scheduled to testify against a weapons smuggling network. The other was a woman identified only by initials, relocated after exposing a healthcare fraud scheme. Both had closure payments pending before Monday. Gabriel reached for his phone. Grant stopped him. No private teams. My people can move faster. Your people are part of the compromised network. They are also the reason half your witnesses survived long enough to enter protection. The room tightened around the truth neither side wanted. Gabriel's identity operation had hidden criminals, but it had also hidden people who feared the government could not protect them. Pike had exploited that weakness. Dismantling the market without first securing those people could expose victims alongside offenders. Evelyn separated the red-marked witness entries from the buyer accounts. Agent Grant secures Talbot through a team outside Pike's district. Gabriel sends no one. Celeste prepares sealed redactions so the witness routes never enter the evidence copy. We continue. Gabriel looked at her. You are issuing orders in my building. You hired an auditor. Grant made the call. At 10:20, a private medical transport van entered the alley behind the building. It belonged to a company under contract with the Inspector General's office for undercover operations. No ambulance lights flashed. No false emergency call entered the city system. 2 trained agents in medical uniforms placed Evelyn on a stretcher after she signed a temporary no-contact directive and recorded a message that Grant would deliver to June if the operation failed. Gabriel stood beside the open rear doors while Celeste covered Evelyn with a sheet up to her shoulders. From the street, Rill would see a woman who had collapsed during a confrontation and was being removed through a private entrance. The controlled database marker would supply the conclusion he wanted. Your breathing is visible, Gabriel said quietly. I am aware. He will photograph you. He already photographed me alive. Gabriel adjusted the edge of the sheet without touching her face. Once the doors open, do not move. Evelyn studied him from the stretcher. Is this the moment you pretend concern makes the method acceptable? No. The answer came without defense. It was the first honest thing he had given her that did not also contain leverage. The transport van emerged into the alley at 10:43. Through the thin fabric, Evelyn heard a camera shutter from across the street. One of the agents announced a time of death for the benefit of a concealed microphone Grant knew Rill was carrying. The words were part of the authorized operation, not a medical declaration, but they entered Pike's stolen channel exactly as intended. Evelyn remained still until the doors closed. Only then did she sit up. Gabriel rode in the front passenger seat. Grant and Celeste sat with Evelyn in the rear. On Grant's tablet, a sequence of access alerts appeared. Pike opened Evelyn's identity package, flagged it closed, and sent an encrypted message to a device associated with RIL. Seconds later, the pending payment linked to Evelyn moved from Pike's son's trust into a cemetery company. Her death had produced revenue before she had reached the chapel. The chapel of St. Mary Magdalene stood on a narrow side street, closed to the public for 6 years, but maintained through one of Gabriel's legitimate property companies. Its former owners had built a records passage behind the sanctuary wall. Gabriel had widened it into an observation chamber long before Evelyn's case, using the space to monitor meetings between buyers who did not trust one another. A narrow carved screen faced the altar. Through it, Evelyn could see the front pews and a closed walnut casket resting on a low platform. The casket contained sandbags, a recording device, and a sealed compartment large enough for the copied ledger page Pike believed Gabriel intended to bury. No replica body waited inside. No mortuary artist had been asked to create a face that could survive a sister's touch. Evelyn had insisted on that correction. The private memorial notice stated that she had requested no viewing after Daniel's funeral. June knew Evelyn had once said she never wanted strangers examining her body while pretending to say goodbye. That genuine memory would make the closed casket credible, which was another cruelty the operation borrowed from Evelyn's real life. Grant gave her a small receiver linked to the sanctuary microphones. Your family will be told the service must remain private because of an ongoing financial investigation. After Pike acts, I will take you to June myself. Evelyn looked at the empty pew where her sister would sit. You are asking me to listen while she believes I am dead. Yes. At least you call it what it is. Grant did not offer comfort. I am sorry. Gabriel remained near the passage door. We can stop. Evelyn turned toward him. Can you guarantee Pike will not reach Talbot or the other witness? No. Then we cannot stop. It should have sounded like agreement. Instead, it exposed the difference between them. Gabriel believed necessity erased guilt. Evelyn believed necessity could explain a choice without making it clean. The first hours inside the chapel were spent auditing copied records while the casket waited in the sanctuary. Evelyn traced the payment generated by her false death and discovered that Daniel's name appeared in the same trust sequence. His closure payment had been released 40 minutes after RIL's vehicle passed a river traffic camera near Daniel's car. Grant obtained an emergency warrant for the trust records using the combined financial pattern. The return showed a transfer from a commercial lighting account controlled by Daniel to a shell company Pike used for relocation expenses. 2 weeks later, the shell company paid Daniel a smaller amount marked Source Advance. Evelyn stared at the phrase. He was paid by Pike. Gabriel said nothing. She examined the supporting code. A hollow square appeared beside Daniel's initials, the same mark she had noticed beside her identity package. In Gabriel's ledger, protected witnesses were marked with circles, buyers with triangles, and involuntary civilian sources with slashes. The hollow square meant voluntary provider. What did Daniel provide? Gabriel looked toward Grant, but she did not rescue him. Evelyn asked again, What did my husband sell? Gabriel's answer came quietly. Your identity. The words did not strike like an explosion. They removed support. Evelyn remained seated because standing required a floor she could still trust. Daniel had given Pike access to her tax returns, passport copy, medical history, old security clearance fingerprints, family names, and personal verification answers. He had signed an affidavit claiming Evelyn had discovered his laundering activity and might cooperate with investigators. That lie allowed Pike to create a false witness assessment file without drawing attention. In exchange, Pike promised Daniel a clean identity and relocation before a federal indictment reached him. Evelyn searched the scanned documents until she found the authorization page. Daniel's signature appeared at the bottom. Beside it was a handwritten correction in blue ink. He had always formed the number 7 with a horizontal bar because his first accounting teacher had insisted on it. The same barred 7 appeared in the date of Evelyn's proposed transfer. No one had forged that habit. He knew Pike would use my identity for someone else. Yes, Gabriel said. He knew the original holder would have to disappear. He may not have understood the closure process at first, but he understood when he signed the final page. Gabriel did not answer. Evelyn found the final page herself. Daniel had initialed a paragraph stating that Evelyn March could be expected to remain socially isolated after his relocation, and that any disappearance might plausibly be attributed to emotional instability. He had described her grief before causing it. He had converted the love of his wife into a forecast of how quietly she could be erased. Grant moved the documents away from Evelyn. We can pause. No. You do not have to process this while working. I spent 11 months refusing to process anything. That is why every man involved knew where I would be. The admission hurt more than Daniel's signature. Evelyn had protected his memory from questions because questioning the dead felt cruel. She had withdrawn from clients, stopped seeing friends, ignored inconsistencies in his accounts, and remained inside the house he had placed beneath a forged lien. Daniel had counted on grief to keep her still. So had Gabriel. Evelyn looked at him across the narrow chamber. You knew. I knew Daniel gave Pike a civilian identity package. You knew it was mine before you sent the collectors. Yes. You knew the envelope would bring me to you. Yes. You left it where I would find it. Daniel wrote the card. After his death, I prevented Pike from removing it from the box. That is not what I asked. Gabriel's expression changed by the smallest degree. I arranged for the debt notice to include the box reference. The room became very quiet, but Evelyn did not allow silence to perform the confrontation for them. You studied the false affidavit Daniel wrote about me. You knew I had stopped working. You knew I had withdrawn from June. You knew I would chase the only clue he left because I was still protecting the idea that he had tried to save me. Yes. My grief made me useful. Yes. And predictable. Gabriel looked directly at her. Yes. Evelyn struck him with the flat of her hand. Grant moved forward, but Gabriel raised one palm and stopped her. The mark across his cheek deepened while he stood without retaliation. You did not save me tonight, Evelyn said. You used Pike's method before Pike could use it. You controlled the facts, manufactured the choices, and expected survival to make me grateful. I expected survival to keep you alive long enough to hate me. That may be the first expectation you got right. She took the copied ledger and moved toward the passage door. Gabriel did not block her. Outside, the chapel remained empty, the casket waiting beneath the dim sanctuary lights. Evelyn walked to it and placed one hand on the polished lid. The coffin was not hers. The funeral had not begun. Yet she had never felt closer to burial. For 11 months she had carried Daniel as though refusing to judge him were an act of fidelity. The documents proved that memory could become a false identity too. She had allowed the dead man she loved to replace the living man who had made choices. That replacement had controlled where she lived, whom she trusted, and which questions she refused to ask. Behind her, Gabriel stopped several feet away. You may leave, he said. Pike is still moving against 2 witnesses. Grant can continue without the funeral. Can she? Grant answered from the passage. We can protect Talbot. We have not yet identified the second witness, the buyer holding Evelyn's package, or the location of Pike's physical archive. The funeral remains our strongest chance to force a retrieval attempt. Evelyn looked at Gabriel. And your ledger remains the strongest way to identify them. Yes. But you have not given Grant the encryption key for the buyer columns. No. Because exposing Pike without exposing your buyers would preserve your market. Gabriel's silence confirmed the last manipulation. Evelyn opened the casket. Inside, beneath the recording equipment, lay the sealed compartment prepared for the copied page. She removed the page and replaced it with the entire black ledger. Gabriel took one step forward. That does not leave this chapel. It goes wherever the evidence goes. The unredacted book contains people who purchased names to escape abusers, traffickers, and corrupt officials. Release it carelessly, and you kill them. I will not release their locations. I will release the transactions, your companies, your buyers who used stolen federal identities, and every payment tied to a closure. That destroys the operation. Yes. You still need the operation to keep the vulnerable identities hidden. Then surrender the key to Grant, separate victims from buyers, and dismantle it under supervision. Gabriel looked at the ledger as if she had placed his own body inside the coffin. His empire did not consist merely of clubs, men, or money. It consisted of the belief that only he could decide which lies protected people and which lives could be spent maintaining them. You are asking me to trust the same government Pike corrupted, he said. No. I am asking you to stop using corruption as permission to own everyone's choices. Grant placed an encrypted drive on the casket. The Inspector General can establish a sealed identity restoration team outside Pike's chain. Witness locations remain protected. Criminal transaction records go to prosecutors. You receive no immunity, but cooperation will be documented. Gabriel looked at Evelyn. And if I refuse? Then I publish what I can prove without your key. Pike may fall. Your business may survive. The people hidden inside it remain dependent on a man who believes manipulation is protection. Evelyn stepped away from the coffin. That decision belongs to you. She returned to the observation chamber and resumed the audit. For nearly an hour, Gabriel remained alone in the sanctuary. Evelyn could see part of him through the carved screen. He sat in the front pew with his elbows on his knees, facing the closed casket that held the ledger on which his power depended. At 2:13 in the morning, he entered the chamber and placed a small metal token beside Grant's laptop. The token contained the master encryption sequence and the map linking his legitimate companies to the identity network. Grant examined it. Once I authenticate this, you cannot withdraw cooperation. I know. You may lose every asset connected to the operation. I know. You may be charged. Gabriel looked at Evelyn rather than Grant. I know. He had surrendered the empire before knowing whether she would complete the funeral, protect him, forgive him, or ever speak to him again. It did not repair what he had done. It was merely the first choice he had made that did not require another person's obedience. By dawn, the decrypted records identified the second threatened witness, a hospital billing director named Lorraine Bell. Grant's external team moved her before Pike's contractor arrived. The files also revealed that Evelyn's identity had been purchased for a 50-year-old financial broker connected to a criminal syndicate in Texas. The buyer had paid the first half. Pike required proof of Evelyn's death before releasing the final documents. Pike now had 3 urgent problems. His planned closures had failed. The payment trust had been searched. Gabriel possessed the master ledger. If Pike fled, the access logs and trust transfers would remain. If he stayed, he needed the ledger destroyed before Grant could authenticate it. Gabriel sent one controlled message through a buyer Pike monitored. The message stated that Evelyn had copied her page before dying, and that Gabriel intended to seal the original ledger inside her coffin as insurance. It was an irrational act for an ordinary criminal, but Pike knew Gabriel's culture of burial promises and private leverage. More importantly, the message offered a reason the ledger would leave the secured chapel. The funeral was scheduled for 4 Sunday afternoon, 2 hours before Evelyn's original closure time. June arrived shortly after 3. She wore a dark blue dress Evelyn had once helped her choose for Daniel's memorial. Mara, June's daughter, remained close beside her. Grant had arranged for a victim support agent to stay nearby when the deception ended, though Evelyn knew no professional preparation could make the next hour harmless. From behind the chapel screen, Evelyn watched June approach the closed casket. Her sister placed both hands on the lid and lowered her head. For a long time, she said nothing. The absence of a speech made the grief harder to witness. Finally, June whispered, "I should have told you about the money." Evelyn leaned closer to the screen. "Daniel came to me 2 weeks before he died. He said someone was threatening you because of his gambling. He asked for $20,000 and made me promise not to call. I gave him 12. He said if you knew, you would try to fix it, and fixing things was what had put you in danger. June's hands tightened on the coffin. I believed him because he used your strength as the reason to keep you ignorant. The sentence reached Evelyn more deeply than any dramatic confession could have. Daniel had not only sold her information, he had used the truth about her competence to persuade other people that excluding her was an act of protection. June remained beside the coffin until Mara guided her toward the front pew. Evelyn pressed one hand against the wooden screen but did not allow herself to open the hidden door. The operation still protected living witnesses. That fact did not lessen what June was being forced to endure. Daniel's brother Louis arrived alone and sat near the rear. He did not approach the casket. His restraint told Evelyn enough. The funeral did not need another secret from him. Daniel's signed pages had already destroyed the false memory that mattered. Two of Gabriel's senior associates entered next. They believed the service marked both Evelyn's death and Gabriel's successful containment of the ledger breach. Their low conversation reached the hidden microphones. He gave the federal woman access to the chapel, one said. Access is not control. And if he turns over the book? The older man looked toward Gabriel, who stood near the sanctuary door. Then Voss is finished. Men follow him because he never spends his own power to save someone else. Gabriel heard them. He did not correct the statement or threaten the speakers. He simply removed the ring bearing his organization's crest and placed it inside his coat pocket. The gesture was small enough that only Evelyn noticed, but it revealed that he understood what surrender would cost before the law assigned a number to it. Owen Pike entered at 3:46. He wore a navy suit, a federal lapel pin, and the composed expression of a man accustomed to being welcomed at the worst moment of another family's life. He introduced himself to June as an official who had reviewed Daniel's old case and offered condolences on behalf of the service. June looked at his extended hand, but did not take it. My sister never mentioned you. No reason she would have. Behind the wall, Evelyn studied Pike's face. He did not resemble the villain grief had invented. He looked administrative, reliable, and slightly tired. That was how institutions hid dangerous men, not behind masks, but behind the public's need to believe competence and decency usually arrive together. Pike approached Gabriel near the casket. Their voices remained low. You created unnecessary attention, Pike said. Her family expected a service. Her family expected a body. They were told the casket would remain closed. Pike glanced toward the front pews. Where is the page she copied? Inside the book. And the book? Gabriel looked at the casket. Pike's expression barely changed, but one finger touched the inside of his wrist where a concealed device rested beneath his cuff. Grant's monitor registered an encrypted transmission leaving the chapel. The recipient was Mason Rill. Pike had not confessed. He had not needed to. He had verified the ledger's location and activated a contractor immediately afterward. The decision linked his federal credentials, Rill's device, and the expected seizure route. The service began. The minister spoke briefly about the harm caused by unfinished words. Evelyn listened through the screen while June sat 10 feet away, believing there would never be another chance to finish anything with her sister. The cruelty of the plan no longer felt abstract. It had a posture, a blue dress, and hands folded too tightly in a lap. Gabriel sat alone across the aisle. He had placed himself where Evelyn could see him. During the prayer, he looked once toward the carved wall, not because he could see her, but because he knew exactly where she stood. Evelyn felt the strange pull that had existed beneath their conflict since the first hour. Not trust, not forgiveness, but recognition between two people who understood how easily intelligence could become a weapon against intimacy. The casket remained closed when the pallbearers carried it outside. The procession would travel 6 blocks to a cemetery gate, where the family had been told a private burial would occur. In reality, the casket would stop before entering. Grant's agents had secured the route under sealed authority tied to the Pike investigation, but uniformed local officers remained out of sight to avoid warning him. Evelyn did not stay behind the chapel wall. While mourners moved toward the street, Celeste opened the casket inside the rear vestibule. Evelyn climbed in wearing the plain black dress she had selected herself. The ledger rested beneath her hands, secured by a strap so she could rise without dropping it. A narrow ventilation panel allowed her to breathe. Gabriel stood beside the open lid. Real may attempt to force the hearse into a federal transport zone. Grant expects that. Expectations fail. So do controlled people. He looked down at her. If the route breaks, I will open the casket. You will follow Grant's signal. If you are in immediate danger, you will protect my choice, not replace it. Gabriel's face hardened with the instinct to refuse. Evelyn watched him fight the habit rather than disguise it. I will follow the signal, he said. Celeste lowered the lid. Inside the darkness, Evelyn heard the casket move, then settle into the hearse. The funeral band began a slow brass hymn at the front of the procession. Wheels rolled over uneven pavement. Each jolt pressed the ledger against her palms. She thought of Daniel inside his car on the river road. She had spent months imagining his final fear, convinced that understanding it would restore the man she loved. Now she understood that his last fear did not excuse the decisions that brought him there. Compassion could survive judgment. Love could survive truth. What could not survive was the false identity grief had created for him. At the fourth intersection, the hearse slowed. A siren sounded once behind them, brief and official. Pike's voice came through a loudspeaker ordering the driver to stop under federal authority. He claimed the deceased was connected to a compromised witness investigation and that the remains had to be transferred immediately. The statement was calculated. It gave local observers a lawful explanation, placed Pike in control of the casket, and allowed him to remove the ledger without publicly acknowledging its existence. Grant's agents, positioned inside an unmarked vehicle, recorded the order. Pike's credentials authenticated the transmission. Rill approached the hearse wearing a Marshal Service windbreaker and carrying a forged transfer form generated from Pike's internal account. Gabriel walked beside the rear door. "Show me the order." Rill held up the document without giving it to him. "Federal custody, step away." "The woman is dead, what witness risk remains?" Rill glanced toward Pike's sedan. "That is not your concern." The procession gathered behind them. June stepped from the family car, demanding an explanation. Mara held up her phone and began recording. Other mourners did the same. Pike had expected confusion, not resistance, but confusion still favored official authority. He emerged from the sedan and approached Gabriel. "Do not turn a procedural transfer into a public incident." Gabriel looked toward the casket. "Open the order to the family." "It is sealed." "Then the casket remains sealed." Pike's patience thinned. "You are obstructing a federal marshal." "No," Gabriel said. "I am asking one to document custody." The exchange was not a confession. It was a contest over procedure, and Pike could not retreat without leaving the ledger beyond his reach. He signaled Rill to take the hearse. Grant's voice sounded through Evelyn's earpiece. "Hold!" Rill opened the rear door and reached for the casket latch. The forged transfer form in his hand carried a digital authorization number issued from Pike's account 9 minutes earlier. That act completed the chain Grant needed: unauthorized database access, financial closure payment, contractor communication, false federal order, and attempted seizure of evidence. "Now," Grant said. Evelyn pushed against the lid. The latch had been designed to release from within, but Rill's hand was still resting on it. The lid struck his wrist and forced him backward. Evelyn rose from the coffin with the black ledger held against her chest. The brass band stopped. June cried out. Phones turned toward the hearse. Owen Pike stared at the woman whose death he had authorized and whose casket he had just ordered seized through a forged federal transfer. Evelyn stepped down without waiting for Gabriel's hand. "Your order names me as a deceased witness," she said to Pike. "Would you like to explain which case I belong to?" Pike recovered quickly. "Mrs. March, you are participating in a criminal deception. Hand me the book and step away from Voss." Which page concerns federal security? All of it may be stolen evidence. You did not know the ledger existed until you accessed an unauthorized identity file and contacted Mason Rill. Pike looked toward the surrounding crowd, then toward Grant's vehicle. His next decision mattered more than any speech. He could deny authority over Rill and abandon the ledger, or he could assert control over both. He chose control. Rill is operating under my direction, he said. This transfer is lawful. Grant stepped into the street with 4 Inspector General agents. Then you have authenticated the forged order for us. Pike's face changed. Grant displayed the warrant authorizing seizure of his devices and arrest for obstruction, identity theft, bribery, and conspiracy connected to compromised witnesses. 2 agents took Rill into custody. Another secured Pike's phone before he could erase it. Pike looked at Gabriel. This ledger belongs to a criminal organization. Nothing in it survives court. Evelyn opened the book to Daniel's transaction page. The ledger does not stand alone. It matches your access logs, your son's trust transfers, the cemetery company payments, the false order generated from your account, and the contractor you just claimed as your agent. You think Voss will let federal prosecutors examine his buyers? Gabriel stood beside the hearse, surrounded by men who had followed him because they believed he would never surrender the system that made him powerful. The encryption key is already in federal custody, he said. Several of his associates moved at once, not toward Pike but toward Gabriel. He raised no weapon. He simply looked at them until they stopped. Evelyn understood what the street was witnessing. Gabriel could still order violence, destroy the transfer, and preserve part of his empire in the confusion. Instead, he allowed Grant to take the ledger from Evelyn's hands. Pike's last defense collapsed because it had depended on Gabriel choosing survival through manipulation. Evelyn turned toward the phones held by her family and the mourners. The witness locations in this ledger will remain sealed. The records showing purchased identities, closure payments, and criminal buyers will not. That includes Owen Pike's operation, and it includes Gabriel Voss's. Gabriel's men stared at him. He said, "Stand down." Grant placed Pike in restraints. He did not confess, threaten Evelyn, or deliver a final explanation. He watched the ledger enter federal custody and understood that the system he had exploited would now testify through records he could no longer reach. June crossed the street slowly. Her face held grief, fury, and disbelief in equal measure. Evelyn stepped away from the hearse, uncertain whether her sister would embrace her or strike her. June did both. The slap turned Evelyn's head. The embrace nearly took her off her feet.
"You let me bury you,"
June said against her shoulder. "I know. You stood behind that wall and listened. Yes. I may never forgive that." Evelyn held her sister without asking her to. "You do not have to decide today." June pulled back and looked at her face as though verifying every living detail. "Daniel gave him your identity?" Evelyn nodded. June closed her eyes. "Then we bury the truth about him, not you." The funeral procession ended in the street. There was no second ceremony and no symbolic burial. Grant took custody of the ledger, Pike, Rill, and Gabriel's encryption key. Celeste accompanied Gabriel to a waiting federal vehicle after he agreed to surrender the document workshops and financial accounts tied to the identity market. Before entering the vehicle, Gabriel stopped near Evelyn. "You released everything. Everything that belonged to the truth. You protected the vulnerable identities. They were never yours to sacrifice." "No." The single word carried no argument. Evelyn looked at the federal vehicle. "What happens now?" "I answer questions without setting the terms. That will be difficult for you." "Yes." She did not forgive him. He did not ask. Owen Pike was indicted after the records from his devices confirmed the compromised relocations, trust payments, and closure orders. Mason Rill cooperated and admitted drugging Daniel before staging the River Road crash. The evidence showed that Daniel had attempted to withdraw from the arrangement only after learning Pike intended to close Evelyn's identity, whether Daniel received his new life or not. That final fact did not restore him. Daniel had regretted the price only after discovering he might not be paid. Gabriel pleaded guilty to conspiracy, document fraud, obstruction, and offenses tied to the identities his organization had sold. His cooperation shortened the process but did not erase punishment. Under federal supervision, Celeste and Grant separated protected clients from criminal buyers, restored records where possible, and funded relocation for people exposed by Pike's market. Gabriel surrendered his clubs, shell companies, document presses, and the chapel. The proceeds entered a victim restoration trust. The organization that had once depended on his secrecy did not survive his decision to provide the key. Evelyn remained in New Orleans long enough to help authenticate the financial evidence. She testified before the grand jury under her own name and refused witness protection when Pike's remaining contractors were secured. For the first time since Daniel's death, she visited the house without feeling that his absence owned every room. She sold it. June did not forgive the funeral quickly. Some weeks, she called Evelyn every evening. Other weeks, she answered only with brief messages. Evelyn accepted both. Repair required allowing another person's anger to exist without managing it toward a preferred conclusion. 4 months later, Evelyn moved to North Carolina and opened a forensic accounting practice above a small bookstore. Her clients included families untangling estates, business partners confronting concealed losses, and spouses who had been told that asking questions was a form of disloyalty. She did not tell them that truth would make life painless. She told them pain caused by facts was cleaner than safety built on lies. Gabriel served part of his sentence in federal custody and the rest under supervised release because his records prevented 2 additional witness killings. He wrote to Evelyn once. The letter contained no apology designed to purchase an answer. It listed the last 3 companies he had dissolved, the final identities transferred to independent protection, and the date he had surrendered the ring his men once treated as a symbol of command. Evelyn did not reply. 8 months later, a second envelope arrived. Inside was a court order showing that Gabriel no longer owned any company, property, account, or hidden document network connected to the identity market. A single handwritten sentence appeared beneath the final page. I have stopped deciding what survival should cost other people. Evelyn folded the order and placed it in her desk. She still did not reply. By the time Gabriel entered the bookstore beneath her office, 14 months had passed since the funeral. He wore a plain dark coat and carried no guard, no gift, and no document requiring her signature. His hair had turned grayer. The authority in his posture remained, but it no longer demanded that the room arrange itself around him. Evelyn came down the stairs and stopped several feet away. You found me. Your business is listed under your real name. That was intentional. I know. He did not step closer. I am permitted to travel. I have work with a legal identity restoration program in Charlotte. They offered me a position because I know how the systems were abused. Do they trust you? No, they verify me. That sounds healthier. It is unfamiliar. Evelyn studied him. She remembered the wet ink beside her death date, the closed casket, June's hands on the lid, and the moment Gabriel surrendered the key before knowing whether any life remained for him beyond his empire. None of those memories canceled the others. There is a coffee shop across the street, she said. You may buy your own coffee. Gabriel almost smiled. May I sit with you? You may ask after we get there. They crossed the street side by side. Evelyn did not carry Daniel's wedding ring, Gabriel's ledger, or a name created by anyone else. She carried only the life that remained after the false versions had been stripped away. A second life had never required her to die. It required the dead to stop making her choices.